Hello, my name is Father Jeremy Leganski. I'm the Associate Pastor at Immaculate Conception in Elmhurst, Chaplain of IC Catholic Prep High School. It's an honor to be with you for this Be Formed Season 11, Week 10, The Creator, paragraphs 279 to 324 of the Catechism. A lot of people don't know when a man is applying to go to seminary to become a priest, part of the application process is this psychological interview. And as part of the psych eval, we actually have to take an IQ test. And I remember when I was taking the IQ test, there was this one part that I was completely terrible with. It was, we had to make these puzzles, and like they gave you different puzzles to make, and they started out easy and they progressively got harder and harder and harder. And at a certain point, the experimenter just said, okay, we're done here, because I was so terrible at these puzzles. And it came out in my psych eval that, okay, this priest's philosophy might be difficult for this seminarian as he goes in. Philosophy dealing with questions of our existence, questions of logic and reason, and kind of more abstract thinking. So I went into philosophy thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fail this because that's what the psychologist said. So anyway, go through philosophy. Every seminarian, we study philosophy for 2 years before 4 years of theology. And I came to love philosophy. I really came to love it because I believe that philosophy, and sometimes it's more important than theology, more important than church teaching. What do I mean by that? Let's be honest. A lot of people nowadays, in our families, in our workplaces, they might not believe in what the church teaches. They might not believe what the Bible reveals. So questions of philosophy, what we can understand with human reason alone, with no Bible, with no catechism even, those are some of the most important questions on the human heart, and that's one of the most important things for us to be able to respond to as Catholics. So I love this section of the Catechism because it really gets at these philosophical questions. It's in paragraph 282. Where do we come from? Where are we going? What is our origin? What is our end? And so today, I want to give 3 arguments for God's existence that, again, only talk about the power, that only use human reason alone. And then I also want to mention and speak into one of the biggest arguments against God's existence. What's interesting is paragraph 286 says, the existence of God the Creator can be known with certainty by the light of human reason. That actually came from the First Vatican Council. So we believe that we can prove God's existence with human reason alone. And that is what I'm going to try to help us understand in today's Be Formed episode. All right, so 3 arguments for God's existence. None of these are mine, but I want to summarize them and offer them to you all. So the first one, it's called the argument from contingency. Okay, and this sounds really fancy, it comes from St. Thomas Aquinas, but hopefully I'll break it down for us. Think of something in the universe, anything. You got it? Okay. Can you imagine a universe where that doesn't exist? In other words, can you imagine life without that thing? And the answer is yes. Because everything we encounter, let's take this pen for example. This pen doesn't need to exist. We can imagine a universe without it. That tree outside doesn't need to exist. I mean, let's be honest, I don't even need to exist. If my parents never met, I would not be here. We can imagine a universe where all these things do not exist. Why? First of all, because the universe began to exist, which means at a certain point in time, there was no universe, there was nothing. So everything that we encounter is what St. Thomas Aquinas calls a contingent being, aka it does not need to exist. So then, how does he argue God's existence from that? Well, everything we encounter are things that don't need to exist. Let's use the analogy of train cars. train cars connected to one another. We can think of these things that don't need to exist but exist in that way. You have 100 train cars, you have 1,000 train cars. You can imagine taking one of those train cars out, putting the rest back together, and the train is still moving. It's kind of a good, I wish I had a whiteboard, but here we go. I'll try to give a handout with all these, by the way, to kind of summarize them at the end. We can imagine taking out one of those train cars, and the train's totally fine. But here's the thing. The train needs to have an engine. If every train car is just connected to another train car that doesn't need to exist, that doesn't explain the train that's moving. If everything depended on something else for its existence, then nothing would be able to exist at all. There has to be something that just exists. And this is what we call God. God is the only necessary being. Sometimes the smart aleck in class will ask, like, if God created everything, then who created God? But that's the whole point. God is the only being that needs to exist. Nothing else needs to exist. You don't need to exist. I don't need to exist. This desk, this doesn't need to exist. This pencil doesn't need to exist. But what's the beautiful part of this teaching? It's a very Catholic understanding of God. Because as Catholics, we do not only believe that God was the first cause of everything to exist. That's the argument, before the universe there was nothing, nothing can only do nothing, therefore God needed to do something, create. Not only do we believe that God was the first cause of all our existence, we believe that God is literally holding everything in existence right now. Remember the song we learned as children, and He's got the whole world in His hands? It's really true. So if God were to stop thinking about you or me or anyone or anything for just a moment, we would cease to exist. So the reason why you are watching this video, the reason why I am speaking right now, is because God is holding us in existence, loving us at every moment of every day. He didn't just create us in the beginning, but He's holding us in existence. We are all borrowing our existence, so to speak, from that engine. And if there were no engine, if there were no train engine, the train would not be moving. All right, that's the argument number one. I promise the other ones are not going to be as philosophically heavy, but it's a good one, especially for those people who try to use science to explain God's existence away. Okay, next one, number two, Pascal's wager. All right, I think this argument is very appropriate in our days nowadays with so much fantasy football and sports betting and all the things. So Pascal's wager. Again, I'll put this on the handout, but we're going to make a chart, okay, with a 2x2 chart. 1, 2, 3, 4 options. All right, on this, either God exists or God does not exist. Can we all agree with that statement? Either God exists or He doesn't exist. There's no third option here. We're all going to find out one day if this is true. Either God exists or He does not exist. We cool? We clear on that? Great. Then we can choose how to live. We can live as if God exists. We can live as if God does not exist. Okay, so that's the setup, and I'll make it a little bit easier right now by introducing it with a game. So let's play a game, heads or tails, okay? Game A or game B. Game A, if you win $1 million. If you lose your house. No, excuse me. I just messed that up. If you win $1 million. If you lose $1,000. Okay, that's game A. Game B, if you lose your house. If you win $1,000. What game would you like to play? I imagine all of you, because you are reasonable, rational, not smart alecky freshmen in high school, you are going to say game A. All right, so let's go ahead and play. Game A, heads or tails, call it in the air. All right, it was tails. Hopefully you won. If not, that's okay, because you were playing game A. You're a reasonable human being. All right, so let's dive into this, how it relates to God's existence. Again, we established either God exists or he does not exist. And we can either live our lives as if he exists, we can live our lives as if he doesn't exist. So if we live our lives as if God exists, and it turns out that he does, that's game A, winning $1 million. You won the jackpot. What is that? That's eternal life in heaven. If we live our lives as if God exists, but it turns out he does not exist, well, we lose $1,000. You know, maybe we didn't make as much money in this life because we gave it to charity. Maybe we didn't have as much free time because we were serving the poor. Maybe we didn't maybe all those prayers were just talking to a brick wall. We lose a little bit of stuff in this life. But game B, if we live our lives as if God does not exist, and it turns out that he does exist, that's losing your house. That's the infinite loss of hell. And what is hell? It's not so much pain and suffering, but hell is being separated from the one thing that we want most. And that's union with God forever. If we live our lives as if God does not exist, and it turns out he doesn't exist, well, you won $1,000. Whoop-de-doo. I mean, maybe you made a little bit more money in this life. Maybe you enjoyed the pleasures of breaking God's commandments. Great. So what's the point of this argument? Is it a foolproof slam dunk like Thomas Aquinas says? No. But this is just something to get ourselves thinking. And some of you, maybe at the beginning, you're like, I don't want to play. I don't want to play this game. I'm cool to not play. Well, here's the thing. We have to play the game. You have to bet. I have to bet. Why? Because of the reality of death. One day, all of us is going to find out if this is true. I mean, I as a priest, I'm betting my life on this. I'm betting my life that the Lord of life exists. So we have to bet. This is a response, this argument is a response to those people who are agnostics, who say, well, I don't know if God exists. There's not enough information. Well, we have to choose. You have to choose. I have to choose. And not choosing is playing game B. Pretending as if there is not a game is playing game B. And in this analogy, what is game A? Game A is living our lives as if God exists. Game B is living our lives as if God does not exist. So to summarize, bet that God exists. Because if you win everything. And if you lose nothing. So bet that he exists and live our lives as if he exists. All right, that was the second argument. Third argument, let's all feel free to pause the video, come up for air. All right, now the third argument. This is from C.S. Lewis. It's called The Argument from Desire. And I'm going to try to prove God's existence just by using dogs. Okay, dogs, we all know, man's best friend, the best pets. Cats don't even count. I'm kidding for all of you cat lovers, but I love dogs. Let's take a golden retriever as an example, the best kind of dog. All right, so what do dogs want? Let's name him Rex. What does Rex want? Rex wants food. He wants treats. He wants pets. He wants sleep. He wants to reproduce. He wants to play fetch. All right, all these desires that Rex has. Rex desires food, and there's such a thing as food. Rex wants sleep, and there's such a thing as sleep. Rex wants to play catch, and there's such a thing as playing catch, playing fetch. Everything that a dog wants can be achieved in this life. In humans, we have some of the same desires as animals, like food, sleep, all the things. We also have deeper desires. We have desires of health and honor. And sometimes these are misguided, but we'll go through them. Health, honor, wealth, power, pleasure, fitness, fame. Okay, but then we also have like the deepest desires of our hearts. I mean, we have a desire to live not just 100 lives, 100 years. We have a desire to live forever. We want to know everything. We don't want to have to watch be-formed videos to learn. We just want to know everything. For my students, I say, you guys don't want to study for your tests. You just want to know. We desire perfect friendship. We desire to be completely loved. Now here's the thing. If God doesn't exist, then those deepest desires of our hearts will never be satisfied. Sure, we can receive glimpses of those in this life. Glimpses of true friendship, glimpses of real unconditional love. But we will never have it in its fullness. We will never have life that lasts forever. So what's C.S. Lewis's argument? If God does not exist, then we are the saddest creatures of them all. Because everything that a dog wants, a dog can get in this life. But we wouldn't. So what's his conclusion? If you find in yourself a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that you were made for another world. I believe that. I believe that we were made for another world where the deepest desires of our hearts will come true. Okay. It's important during this lesson to also talk about the biggest argument against God's existence. Because we talked about these three, they're great, but let's be honest, they don't answer everyone's questions. So I want to speak to what I think is the biggest argument against God's existence. And what is that? And the Catechism talks about it in these paragraphs as well. It's the problem of evil, the problem of suffering. This is a question that we all have to answer at some point in our lives or another. If God is all good, if he's all powerful, if he's all loving, then why does he let bad things happen? Why does God let bad things happen to good people? If I had to answer that question, the first thing I would say is, I don't know. I have to start with that because I say this with great reverence with whatever's happened in your life or your family's life, that when deep suffering happens, no explanation will suffice. As a priest, I get to be with people in really big moments of their lives, the biggest highs and the biggest lows. And in those biggest lows, I don't sit there saying, well, this is why God lets bad things happen to good people. No. On the one hand, I have to say, I don't know, that I can't offer just an explanation that'll explain everything away. So nothing I say will be truly satisfying. I have to start with that. But if I had to say something, if I had to give an answer, this is what I would say. that Christianity is the only religion that makes any sense of suffering. Because for those people who say, well, I can't believe in God, he wouldn't let bad things happen to good people. He wouldn't be letting all these things happen in the world right now if he existed. Well, here's the thing. Even if you don't believe in God, suffering is still going to happen. Like, just because we don't believe in God doesn't mean like, oh, okay, that doesn't mean I'm not going to suffer one day or my family won't suffer. Let's be honest, we're all at some point in another in our lives going to experience suffering. And I think that Christianity is the only religion that can even begin to make sense of suffering. Why? Because we have a God who suffered. Every time you look at a crucifix, you see a God who suffered for you. The cross tells us that Jesus is with us in our suffering. He's close to us in our suffering. He does not abandon us. And he also wants to transform our suffering. And this is part of what the Catechism talks about with God allowing evil. God does not will these things to happen. He does not want moral evil, sin to happen. That's why he gave us free will. If God didn't give us free will, he wouldn't truly love us. Is it love if a boyfriend says to a girlfriend, love me, you have to love me? And that's not love. Love requires freedom. So God truly loves us. God truly gave us free will, which means we can truly turn our backs to him in sin. So God does not want these bad things to happen, whether it's moral evil or physical evil in terms of earthquakes, diseases, illnesses, things like that. But God allows these things to happen in his, one of the toughest words in our faith, in his providence. Somehow we believe that God will only allow suffering if he will bring about a greater good. What is that greater good? I don't know necessarily in your life. We might find it out in this life, but for a lot of us, we might only find out in the life to come why God allowed that thing to happen. But here's what I do know. I know that every Good Friday can become an Easter Sunday. What do I mean by that? The story doesn't end on Good Friday. The story doesn't end with Jesus dying on the cross. The story ends on Easter Sunday. The story ends with not the suffering and the pain of the crucifixion, but it ends with Jesus overcoming sin, overcoming death, giving life to us forever. So whatever Good Friday might be going on in your life right now, or has happened, or will happen, God will always bring about an Easter Sunday. Maybe not in this life, but yes, in the life to come. So to summarize everything that we've talked about today, I want to go back to where we started this season. That's paragraph 1 of the Catechism. And this is gold. And I want to use this first paragraph of the Catechism to summarize today. The very first words, God, infinitely perfect and blessed in himself, in a plan of sheer goodness, freely created man to make him share in his own blessed life. For this reason, at every time and in every place, God draws close to man. He calls man to seek him, to know him, to love him with all his strength. He calls together all men scattered and divided by sin into the unity of his family, the church. To accomplish this, when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son as Redeemer and Savior. In his Son and through him, he invites us to become, in the Holy Spirit, his adopted children, and thus heirs of his blessed life. God is infinitely perfect and blessed in himself, He's the only necessary being who did not need to make anything, but he wanted to make us, to share in his own blessed life. He wants us to bet that he exists, to live our lives as if he exists, to win the eternal jackpot, so to speak. He wants all of the desires of our hearts to come true, and those will only come true if he exists. And yes, he allows suffering. He allows suffering to happen in our lives, but also he promises us that Good Friday isn't the end of the story, and that with him there will be no more Good Fridays, but only an Easter Sunday that lasts forever.